Okay, so here's what happened. I filmed this section in advance of the whole video because I bought into the internet hate machine and assumed I'd be writing a video of frustration. And then I played the game and liked it, so this entire on-camera segment saved me literally no time and was done for no reason. Ah well. Roll the new intro. Now, I know that I introduced this by revealing my hand about how I feel, but my intention isn't to attack the masses hating on this game, the ones contributing to the review bombing effort, or to throw my opinion down your throat. My goal is to provide an understanding of what's been happening, the significance of it, and how it impacts the gameplay. I am not involved in any of the controversy, and largely, I'm unaffected by it as things currently stand. I only speak as a fan of the franchise since that fateful Christmas morning, where me and my Squirtle set out from Pallet Town for the first time and joined the millions of kids around the world doing the very same, and changed our lives forever.
Squirtle was a Pokemon from Generation 1 that was cut from Sword and Shield due to budget and time constraints.
Oh, well that's depressing. I also want to analyze where I felt mistakes were made, what good there is to find, and whether the controversy is justified. In addition, I want to highlight the recurring tropes of the Pokemon franchise and see if they still hold up now that we're beyond certain hardware limitations. So, let's dissect it. Part 1. The hype begins. It's strange to think that a little over a year ago, the internet was still complaining about Let's Go Pikachu being a knockoff game for Gen 1ers and not a real Pokemon game. Pretty much every internet forum you can think of blew up over these games, with a clear line divided between people who were interested in the spin-off remake and people who wanted a quote-unquote real Pokemon game. The narrative around this basically made it out like the 8th generation games were going to somehow save them from some kind of imaginary harm they were doing to the franchise. It was stupid and dumb and it didn't make any sense. And as someone who was skeptical about Let's Go, I can say that I enjoyed them both thoroughly. But of course, anytime the internet lets its hype grow out of control, which is pretty much always, its expectations consistently fail to align with reality, and we get whiny complaints about things that don't really matter and over-analysis of trailers to unfinished games. Not that I can say anything, I do it too. I'm just saying, we make our own beds and lie in them when we over-idealize something. But for whatever it's worth, the internet was actually onto something this time. Part 2. Generation 7. The bad one. I imagine if you're watching this, you've probably played Sun and Moon, and you likely noticed, like everyone did, the one big glaring feature missing from the post-game that literally every Pokemon game has had since, well, ever. The National Pokédex, which, for the uninitiated, is a chronological documentation of every single Pokemon available throughout the history of the franchise. But for the completionists out there, it was a log of progress. It was proof of their long-fought journey to catch every single one of these creatures from every game, spin-off, and weird service storage disc that they managed to get their hands on. Like, for instance, maybe you had an Ekans from way back in Pokemon Fire Red, or maybe you had a Gligar with the perfect nature and ability, or maybe just a Greninja you've gotten really attached to. Back then, you could bring them all forward to your newest game and continue the journey with them.
Ekans, Gligar, and Greninja are Pokemon from Generations 1, 2, and 7 that were cut from Sword and Shield due to budget and time constraints.
Great! There wasn't honestly too much fan backlash at the time, mostly because while the National Dex itself was removed, you could still actually bring these Pokemon into the game and play with them if you really wanted to. You weren't prevented from doing so, and since the character models were basically unchanged from the last two 3DS games, there really wasn't any excuse to not include them. And besides, there was a lot more to dislike about Sun and Moon than your in-game encyclopedia not counting for much anymore. Like, you guys who watch my screenwriters video know how big I am about not interrupting gameplay with cutscenes. And previous Pokemon games were great about this. In fact, from what I remember, it barely happened. Mostly because they didn't need to. You didn't need all this needless direction from the narrative and hand-holding from everyone. You were just a kid on an adventure. And that, in and of itself, was fun. Sure, you'd have to figure out some story stuff in Roblox sometimes, but they were never that hard, and after a little bit of asking around, you usually could figure it out. And yet, for Sun and Moon, this idiot stops you every 5 feet and interrupts your freedom to explore. And the weird thing? This is the only Nintendo franchise that this is happening to. Like, Mario Odyssey maintained gameplay as the focus and really added a lot more content to explore and play with. Breath of the Wild increased the gameplay focus so significantly to the point that some people didn't appreciate the lack of a story. So, is the problem Game Freak? At first you'd think so, but they also made Pokemon Let's Go, which didn't do that at all. Sure, it was mostly a remake of Pokemon Yellow, but maybe having that kind of gameplay as a roadmap might actually be good for the Pokemon franchise? Maybe the games of the past can actually teach us something about what works for the games of the future. Like, maybe having visible Pokemon on screen cuts down on the tedium of random battles so that when we go into a cave, we don't need to run into 24 Zubat.
Zubat was a Pokemon from Generation 1 that was cut from Sword and Shield due to budget and time constraints.
So the problem doesn't seem to necessarily be Game Freak itself, so maybe it's the director? If this chart I found is accurate, then that could be the case. It seems to indicate that the lead on the most recent Pokemon games was a guy named Shigeru Omori. He didn't do Let's Go, but he did do Sun and Moon and Sword and Shield, so maybe this is our guy? I don't know. I don't want to lay blame at his feet, and given his credits list, he certainly has plenty of accomplishments under his belt for me to say the guy knows what he's doing. But maybe he just doesn't agree with me about this particular design aspect. Who knows? And I know a lot of people are gonna hate me for this, but I thought Pokemon Let's Go was actually fantastic on the gameplay side, despite the removal of random battles. And I know you'll hate me even more for this, but locking it to Gen 1 made completionism actually really fun and approachable. And you're talking to someone who spent time collecting every form so he could Pokemon bank transfer them in X and Y. The fat lot of good that did. But where Let's Go seemed to be an Oh, right, number 3, storytelling. But where Let's Go seemed to be an advancement in all areas, even if you didn't necessarily like it, Sword and Shield seems unable to take one step forward without taking one step back. And that mainly is in how they tell the story of these games. In fact, that's pretty much where all the flaws in terms of gameplay actually stem from. The mechanics of Pokemon have remained largely unchanged since Generation 1, with new elements and rules being added over time. But the core premise is simple. Monsters battle, and the stronger one wins, whether through type advantage, strength, strategy, or dumb luck. So the only major advancement this series has had, and the only one it's really needed to have, was in its presentation. And it, for the most part, has done that. Its graphics improved over time, the music became bigger in response to the hardware, and the story it told became more elaborate as the visuals could accommodate it. And the cool thing about Pokemon stories is that they don't have to be complicated. You're a Pokemon trainer. You want to be the best. And that's it. You have a rival, and you don't like him. He's kind of a dick. But your rivalry pushes you forward. You like to hate this kid. And when he shows up, you're excited about beating him down. And when you do beat him, you feel like you're breaking him down psychologically. You're having breakthroughs and making this guy realize his value system is effed up. Or at least, you used to. For some reason, since Ruby and Sapphire, Pokemon has more or less done away with the bad guy rival and made the rival more of your friend from the same town who you like, but who just can't seem to beat you. Oh gosh darn. And even worse, now they'll basically tell you what to do all the time and constantly interrupt your gameplay to do it. How? But it's interesting that these bad decisions are coming from the same Game Freak who make good decisions like visible map Pokemon and raid battles. Like, there's a lot to love about Sword and Shield, but it's entirely in the gameplay segments. That's the thing. Pokemon at its core is still Pokemon. The fun part is still raising your Pokemon and battling them. And that is still here, and it has never stopped being fun. So as long as that's present, this franchise will never stagnate too hard. But I think the issue of pacing is what has really held the last few generations back from being great instead of just being good. Part 4. Pacing. I talked before about how cinematic games are becoming, and that is no different in Pokemon. But with games, you want people to get to the gameplay fast. You want them enjoying themselves and hooked as soon as possible. And no offense, but your super happy town and nice neighbors aren't going to sell you on gameplay unless that game is Animal Crossing. You need to get to the battles. The early gens knew this, or at the very least, they couldn't do anything else. They got to the gameplay right away. The time between leaving your room and getting into the first Pokemon battle was much faster. Like, let's compare. Here's Pokemon Red. Here's Pokemon Ruby. Here's Pokemon X. And here is Pokemon Sword. It's not a long time by any means, but it's definitely a lot more than necessary. But this is more or less the way that most games are now, and by comparison to some other games, this isn't actually that bad. So I can forgive it for wanting to have a flashier intro. What I can't forgive is the constant pace breaking by these friend characters. Every town you visit, you'll be interrupted by some member of the cast for some cutscene that has very little relevance to anything going on, just to give you some exposition and then point you in the direction of the gym, which you were already going because the game already told you to do that. Which, by the way, the gym challenge this time around is actually really well done. Instead of just walking around a themed landscape, which you still do, you're actually taking part in a series of challenges that range from utterly pointless to freaking hilarious. Like, this fire challenge has you competing to catch Pokemon with other gym trainers, but you can just knock out their Pokemon before they even have a chance to try, and just take your time catching as usual. I love it. It's such a cool way to bend the mechanics of this game. But anyway, I don't want to come off like I don't want Pokemon to have story and characters. I do. I absolutely do. But a constant interruption by some kid to tell me how he's going to totally beat me next time, and how he's going on to the next town, doesn't add anything to the story. It just interrupts what I want to be doing. Likewise, I don't need Sonya's world exposition. Weave it into the gameplay. Do something akin to the Unknown Ruins where there's a mystery to be solved, or work it into the lore like in Cinnabar Island's lab. Let me choose to learn about these legendary Pokemon and their history. As it is now, these characters are no better than Navi and Feet, especially Hop. He's annoying. His story isn't interesting, and he doesn't offer any reasonable competition. Meanwhile, Bede and Marnie are awesome. Bede has actual motivations for his decisions, a weird obsession with the chairman, and an annoying smug attitude to boot. He's exactly what's fun about a rival. You don't like him, so you want to wipe that cocky smile off his face. And Marnie, she's the character that's fun to challenge. A tough, confident rival who brings something new to the table and perfectly contrasts Bede's role as the jerk rival. Hop just doesn't shut up about how great his brother is, and that's it. That's his character. For more than half the game.
All this prattle about Jason the champion and whatnot. Do you not have anything of your own to show?
God, if that isn't accurate. And I could tolerate him a lot more if he was just some annoying kid I had to deal with. But everyone goes out of their way to tell you what he's doing all the time. It's like you're a side character in Hop Adventure. Ugh. I will say though, he's still better than Hal, and at least toward the end of the game, his arc actually does shift to something a little more personal feeling. It feels tacked on, but at least it's something. That said, that's about all the bad I actually have to say about Sword and Shield, because, like I said from the start, I actually really like this game. Like, a lot. The interface is really nice and fast-paced, the gym challenges are fun and interesting, Team Yell is an original idea for an enemy team, and the coup de grace of this game, the wild area. This is exactly what I want from a modern Pokemon game. A big, sprawling area with tons of wild Pokemon walking around that I can engage with and test my luck against. I think that this idea has a lot of potential for expansion and could be made even bigger and further layered in future Pokemon games. This is the next big innovation this franchise needs, and I am here for it. And the cool thing is, you won't always be able to catch what you see. Sometimes Pokemon are going to be too strong for you and may actually cause you a lot of trouble. And while having high-level, uncatchable Pokemon may seem like a bad barrier, to me, it incentivizes revisiting an area and exploring further. Except this area with the ghost Pokemon. This was dumb. Gastly isn't a high-level Pokemon, and this was misleading and annoying. Regardless, this was fun. Although this area could definitely use a mini-map or quick open for the town map. You can actually even find fully evolved Pokemon like Machamp, or super weird Pokemon like this Stork. Wait, what? Okay, that was pretty good. I wasn't expecting him to just huck a Pikachu at me.
Pikachu was a Pokemon that was.
Oh, wait, we got that one? Okay, never mind. But, and I've avoided talking about it until now, there is one major point we have to get to. And this is one aspect of the game I absolutely can't defend. Whether you care about it or not, we can all agree, Game Freak's handling of this was very, very poor. I am, of course, talking about Part 5. Lying to your fanbase about cutting Pokemon from Sword and Shield due to budget and time constraints. Yeah. Look, there's not much I can add to the discussion on this that hasn't already taken place by every poster on the internet. This was idiotic. So, for those somehow not in the know, the National Dex was cut from Sun and Moon, as mentioned before, and this carried forward into Sword and Shield. Only this time, you couldn't use the Pokemon not in the Pokedex, and the fans were pissed, and justifiably so. Game Freak came forward about this controversy and claimed it was because of budget and time constraints that they couldn't reanimate all these creatures in time for the new game. Which did little to appease the angry masses, but as most expected, they bought the game anyway and Game Freak knew that, so whatever. What Game Freak didn't know, and likely should have anticipated, was that data miners or hackers or whatever people it is that somehow get this information out of games would go into the data for Sword and Shield and revealed that the models that they claimed to have reanimated were identical to the models from the 3DS games. Meaning, they didn't redo anything, and that excuse was just a complete lie. So naturally, people were again pissed. And yeah, there's not really a good justification for this. I mean, I'd be pissed too. Imagine you were someone who sunk hours into a Sandile and made the perfect Dark and Ground type with a moveset equipped for anything, and you raised it all the way to a Crocodile, and you traded it from Black and White to X and Y, and you paid that $5 for Pokemon Bank, which seems superfluous, but it's still downright reasonable, so who am I to complain? But it turns out Pokemon Bank isn't compatible with Sword and Shield, but then they announce a brand new service not coming until 2020 to replace Pokemon Bank, so you decide to wait, but then they cut the national dex anyway, so you can't transfer most of your favorite Pokemon, meaning your Crocodile is trapped forever in the past, never to be part of your journey again, and you look at Game Freak and you ask why, and they tell you Crocodile was a Pokemon from Gen 5 that was cut from Sword and Shield due to budgetary and time constraints. Only it wasn't, because none of that was true, and my friend is in a coma now, and I don't think he'll ever wake up! Okay, it's not quite like that, but if you read the internet forums, it sure as hell felt like it. Point is, Game Freak screwed up, and I can't make a defense for that. This was dumb. Really dumb. But Sword and Shield is still overall a really enjoyable game, and one I'm glad I played. I won't convince anyone with this, but I do encourage people to give these a try if they're considering skipping them. I think there's a lot to love, even in spite of some, changes. So go ahead. I think you'll be glad you did. Thank you so much for watching this video all the way through. Obviously, I'm not the best at regular uploads, but if you do like this video, please share it and leave a comment. I can definitely see people having some problems with some of the stances I took here, and I would love to hear your feedback on that. Let's debate this. Until next time, I'm going to be working on a video on a series of games that never quite left Japan, at least for the most part, and I'm excited to share that. So, until then, I will see you all next time.